Oh, dude, did I show you what I got?
No, what'd you get? Oh, that's so cool. Dude, is that like... That looks like Ralph McQuarrie concept art.
Tatooine, baby.
Tatooine, baby.
No, you got to say it like Jango Fett does.
Tatooine. Tatooine.
Tatooine. It's fantastic.
Speaking of which, welcome to Talk About Tatooine. I'm Andrew.
I'm Nathan.
And we are twin brothers here to bring you what's new in nerddom and give colorful commentary on our favorite subjects. Welcome to our cantina. Grab a drink and settle in as we set course for realities beyond our own.
And cheers, brother. Make sure you guys check out our Etsy shop. We've got cool stickers for your water bottles. When you cheer your brothers while you're in chat, you can do it with style.
Indeed.
Welcome to everybody to episode 91. Today's recording date is November 3rd, and this episode is going to be released tomorrow, November 4th. Today, we're going to be doing our last part on the Thousand Suns. This is part 3. We're talking about Magnus. Andrew, I believe instead of a starter question today, you have a fun fact to start us off.
I do have a fun Primarch fact.
I do have Primarch facts.
Yes, indubitably. The first Primarch to be discovered was actually found on Terra, and was indeed Alfarius. It's commonly believed that I think Horus was the first Primarch found, but it actually was Alfarius, and the Emperor just kept him secret. That's right, contrary to the story that Horus was first discovered, the Emperor found Alfarius on Terra and kept him a secret. With this, we don't know if he found Omegon. I think he found Omegon last still. So it's still bookended by Alfarius and Omegon, the twin Primarchs.
That tracks. Twin
Also
Primarchs,
would have been
Twin Sons, Twin Podcast, you know.
The twin Primarchs would have been a good name for the podcast.
Indeed.
But, oh well.
We did ask our patrons some questions and wanted to share some feedback with you. So the question that we posed is, what do you guys want to know? What are some of your favorite moments in Thousand Suns lore, and who are your favorite characters in these factions? And one of our patrons and common chatter on our Twitch channel is Calmbrew. And he said, I think the Thousand Suns are rather unique in their position in the heresy, and this is definitely worth more exploring.
And I responded with, there were several legions that were pivotal in the Horus heresy reaching Terra. The Wolves burning down Prospero was one, the Astartes of Ultramar being kept out of the conflict, and Magnus himself. The campaign orchestrated against Magnus, done in part by the Emperor and the traitor Horus, was critical in turning Magnus over to chaos. If Magnus had stood with the Emperor, Horus would have been obliterated well before he made it to the steps of the Imperial Palace.
Yeah, there's no way he would have made it. Absolutely not. The second part of this, because we had asked multiple questions, this was, Psyker powers are often focused on being larger and flashier, but I found a particular appreciation for when 2000 Suns use their powers to detach and remove a clutch of psychically implanted parasites from a remembrancer's brain. The sheer finesse and control is kind of insane.
So this specific event happens in the book titled 1,000 Suns, and these were called the Psychnuin. They're the native predator of Prospero, and they're like literal brainworms. Before the K-Suns really made Prospero their home, it was being overrun by these flying insectoid things that used warp witchery to plant their seeds in the brains of their prey, essentially. So they wouldn't carry their own young, they would just put their eggs in your brain and let you do the work.
So many inappropriate things come to mind that are more Slaneshi than anything else, but I'm like, man, that's one way to reproduce.
But it's also a horrible way to die, because when they did hatch, it would kill the person they infected. And the instance that Calmbrew is actually referencing is when this remembrancer had stumbled across a hidden nest of these warp freaks while traveling with one of the members of the K-Suns and got seeded during the process. They rushed them back to Tizca, where some of the Thousand Suns had to basically perform magic surgery to save this person.
What a wild time.
It's a good book. 1,000 Suns.
The third answer to our question was highlighting a specific character, and he responded easily, Azek Aramin for his position as first captain of the Legion, his knowledge and proximity to Magnus, and his role as the primary creator of the Rubik ritual. He has so much to explore.
Yeah, you really can't talk about the Thousand Sons in their current state without talking about Azek Aramin. Other than Magnus, Aramin is a fascinating character. Aramin, before the Primarchs came back into the current 40k timeline and before the Horus Heresy was written, each of the legions / chapters had their own epic heroes, those who stood alongside their Primarchs in the days of old, and some live on even in the current setting, 10,000 years later, to lead the Imperium or to attempt to burn it to the ground. I think the most notable of these epic heroes were actually of the traitor Primarchs. Let's see, Magnus had Azek Aramin, Mortarion had Typhus, also known as Tython, I think.
Yeah, the names change a lot in Warhammer.
Yeah. Angron had Karn, also known as Karn the Betrayer. Horus had Ezekiel Abaddon. Fulgrim had Lucius. And now that I think about it, I don't really know a lot of the heroes of the Heresy Age from the Loyalist Primarchs. I only know the Chaos ones.
Well, I'm trying to think. A lot of folks from the Ultramarines died. Not a
Yep.
lot of them survived through. I mean, the Ultramarines are the main characters of the entire universe. They don't need. They're fine. They'll be okay. Imperial Fists have. Who's the guy that turned over and he was like the really good fighter, really good swordsman?
Sigismund?
Sigismund. Yeah. So the Imperial Fists have Sigismund. I don't know anybody from the White Scars.
The Blood Angels had I don't remember. Unhinged Peanut Gallery reporting.
Welcome in, Combrew.
The Sanguinor.
Yes.
Hey, thanks for the 69 bits. Appreciate you, bud.
69.
69 is a funny number, and it always will be. Okay.
Anyways, Combrew, welcome in. We were actually going through and actually answering your three-pronged response to one of our questions about the Thousand Sons concerning basically, so what do you want to know? Some favorite moments in the Thousand Sons lore and favorite characters in the factions. We talked about the Thousand Sons position in the Heresy. We talked about the Psych Nuin, and we talked about a little bit Azek Aramin. So welcome back in.
I should note as well that in our Patreon server, Management Slug has expressed interest in wanting to build a Thousand Sons army, which we are eagerly looking forward to. We are going to watch your progress with significant interest. I don't think that's the exact quote from Palpatine, but it's getting there. And then Strike Master Ice continues to build his Grey Knights army for some explicable reason. How dare you, loyalist scam?
I actually think this is a great moment to actually highlight our Patreon. Specifically, we'll shout out you, Combrew, because we actually made an episode that's going to come out after this one earlier today. And we talked about like, hey, what does it take to get into Warhammer? What do I need to know to start playing Warhammer? And this guy basically sat back in his chair, cracked his knuckles, and was like, let me get after it, and just like absolutely like spelled it out in great detail, but also like in a very simple, plain English way as well. I love it when people are like clear and concise, but also provide good detail. It's just does things for my brain. So that was really cool. That's just something we do on our Patreon. Is we like to help each other out. We like to cheer each other on. So when people are building cool models or printing cool models, we've got a guy on our Patreon that paints and like has these little like Halo models that are the same scale as the Warhammer tabletop game, and it's super cool. So lots of cool stuff is happening over there.
Dude, yeah, Cuddly Axolotl in the chat. Hey, bud, what army are you gonna get? I'm gonna peer pressure you into getting an army.
We'll get all of them eventually. So today's episode, guys, we wanted to mention just a little bit about the cool things our patrons are doing, but we also wanted to finish our series on the Thousand Sons. And we have talked around this character quite a bit, but we hadn't really focused on his exploits alone. Today, we are talking about Magnus the Red. It's in the title, so you guys should be able to see it down below me, or actually technically over underneath Andrew's face over on Twitch. It is episode 91. We are talking about Magnus the Red. So the first one we want to talk about is like, hey, if you are new to the Warhammer fandom and you're like, hey, who's this guy who's got red skin. He looks like he got dipped in a vat of red 40 and he only has one eye. Like, what's going on here?
He's the
So,
Fruit Punch Man.
the Fruit Punch Man. Fruit Punch Man. Not One Punch Man, Fruit Punch Man. Shout out to all my anime friendos who I don't actually know if that's even an accurate reference because I don't watch anime. So, anyways, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today. We don't have time for that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about something cool like Warhammer.
Yeah. Yeah. So, who is Magnus the Red? Magnus is one of the 18 remaining Primarchs during the Great Crusade. He is the head of the 15th Legion, the Thousand Sons. We've talked about them in multiple episodes before, so we're finishing them off here. We're not finishing off Magnus. We're finishing off our series talking about Thousand Sons.
Please stop saying finishing off Magnus. Please.
Never.
Gosh.
He's actually one of the most able-bodied, pretty handsome. No, he's a pretty strong psyker. Second strongest psyker in the entire galaxy at this point. So, if you guys don't know, he's a super fun guy. The only human psyker that surpasses Magnus is the Emperor of Mankind. You could maybe argue that Malkador the Sigillite was like close, but Malkador wasn't really funneling and taking sweet hits of that chaos juice. So probably takes that third class spot there. Just keep in mind, during the Great Crusade, Magnus was actually technically found pretty early on in in the Great Crusade, because he actually had a psychic connection with the Emperor almost the whole time. So he just had to find him. They could talk to each other, they could communicate, but they just weren't in physical contact. So just keep that in mind. That's a cool little fun factoid about Magnus. Without the Primarchs, there would be no Great Crusade, as the Emperor needed his generals to fight his way through the galaxy, all in his name. Magnus was especially pivotal to this plan because he was the linchpin of the Emperor's plan to rule the galaxy, abandoning travel by Hell Train through the warp and conquer the Webway. I just said a lot of different things. Basically, humans have to use a transdimensional space called the warp to travel faster than light to get around the galaxy. There's also another way that they can do that, which is through the Webway, which is basically like an alien subway made by space elves. So
yeah, that's pretty accurate, actually.
But they don't have access to it yet. They're trying to get access to it and take it over. Anyways, they still have to take the Hell Rail. So they're taking the Hell Rail. Magnus is super good at that, but they need to, have a human battery for that. So Magnus doesn't know it, but he basically got created for the sole purpose, mind, body, and soul, to be sat on the golden throne and used as a future battery. This immense psychic potential led him to be a really strong wizard, but also his genes were riddled with problems, causing his whole legion of Astartes, his space marines, to suffer from the flesh change.
So I actually have a theory. In the creation of the 15th Legion and their issues with the flesh change, Magnus became quite desperate in his attempt to save his sons. Unlike his father, he actually cared for his children and so sought more and more desperate solutions to fix them. While a first-hand account of these events is not cataloged in our Lexicanium, it is believed that Magnus dove into the waves of the Great Ocean, the Warp, and stole the ability to create, to modify, to change his sons from the Chaos God Tzeentch. I theorize that the reason Magnus had to do this in the first place comes from the fact that the Emperor himself stole a portion of that same power from the God of Change in order to create Magnus. Since that moment, Magnus has been an echo of the Emperor's hubris, being gifted phenomenal cosmic power and a lack of vision to use it properly, i.e. an itty-bitty living space.
Because being a psyker is in itself a mutation in this universe, more strong psychic powers lead to greater mutations. Hence the flesh change. That's how we got in here. So essentially the theory is that we don't have it like written down directly in a book that there is a direct conversation between Magnus and Tzeentch. It's all alluded to. So that's where we're pulling this from, is different novels in the Horus Heresy. Basically, Magnus bargained with Tzeentch to save his sons. And his sons later found out about this and weren't super happy about it because they were loyal to the bitter end to Magnus. It was only until the sorcerers of Magnus were driven from their home on Prospero, did they find themselves at the feet of Tzeentch with nowhere else to go? I misspelled sorcerers, and so my brain totally turned off there for a second.
Servers is what it says in our notes.
Yes. At this point, the Great Crusade continues, and eventually Psykers were actually banned at Nicaea, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail because this banning, the Council of Nicaea is also referred to as the Trial of Magnus because he gets put on blast. So basically, at the end of all this, we've chatted about this before. Heresy comes afoot, Russ attacks, sacks Prospero, Magnus joins with Horus, and everyone moves on to Terra. Let's talk about more of the events happening in the middle, though.
So we're going to go even farther back than the sacking of Prospero to the compliance of Ogoru. Psyker ban. I love that.
Coming in with that live commentary. Love it. So we're going to talk about the compliance of Ogoru. Thank you, Andrew, for introing us here. Now, this is always important because you'll see a lot of interactions between the Thousand Sons and Space Wolves who tend to break down relations the more they interact with each other. So just keep that in mind. That is the underlying tension between them. Now, I'm going to say a lot of words here, a lot of funny words. I'm going to do my best to pronounce some of these, so please stick with me here, folks. So, the Thousand Sons and a small band of Space Wolves were sent to bring the world of Ogoru into the Imperial fold. The people here were relatively primitive to Imperial standards. Compliance on this world was achieved mostly through diplomacy here, which is super rare for the Imperials. You guys should know that, especially with the Space Wolves present. This actually probably actively enraged the Space Wolves because they didn't get to kill anything. So just keep that in mind.
Brother, why have you not axed anything in the head? I am yearning for the blood.
That is actually kind of what all of the voice actors sound like when they're doing the audiobooks. So if you guys are wondering where we're getting those voices, you should listen to some of the audiobooks that have the Space Wolves in there. There's a lot of accents happening. Anyways, being a primitive world, they also had lots of legends. One such legend was the Elohim. Elohim basically is like what we would think of as an angel. In this case, it was most likely the Eldar, not angels, but the Eldar that they had referred to based on the description of hedonistic excess that they partook in. So if you guys don't know, quick tangent on the Eldar basically ruled the galaxy like thousands and thousands of years ago. They had too big of a party and they birthed a chaos god into existence because they were indulging in too much basically sex, drugs, rock and roll. And a lot of them died because of it. So there's not a lot of Eldar anymore. There's a new Chaos God, and there's a lot of empty webway and Eldar paraphernalia around. So just keep that in mind. So there's all these like ruins, and they're most likely Eldar. It doesn't say specifically, but they most likely are.
But they for sure were, right? Yeah. I mean, come on.
So the legends were that the Elohim had locked themselves into a mountain and had imprisoned, now stick with me, the Dysethai, described on Warhammer 40k.fandom as a perverted and corrupt demonic force with them. Cool. Upon further inspection, the mountain contained pathways to many worlds, which is very much the webway. It was broken, though, so just keep that in mind. The portion of the webway had been corrupted by these warp creatures. The Thousand Sons accidentally wake up some Elder Titans, and they may have to bring them down.
So one of the questions we asked about this particular event is why? Why is this event important, and why is it included on our list of significant milestones to cover specifically for Magnus? During this time, the Wolves, yes, those wolves who famously hate Psykers, sent a couple of rune priests and I think some regular wolves as well to keep a watch over the Thousand Sons. They were doing this across the legions, almost as if they knew things were going to hit the fan. But one of these wolves was Othir Weirdmake, a rune priest who buddied up with Azek Araman, and they developed a friendship. Araman, I believed at first, was like, I don't trust the wolves, but on the insistence of Magnus, decided to befriend the son of Russ, and they actually became quite close. Although Araman should have trusted his instincts, as Othir was one of the first Astartes to testify against the members of the Thousand Sons at what would later become known as the Trial of Magnus. Remember what we called this? This was the Council of Nicaea. It's all coming together. Araman followed the leading of Magnus and essentially tricked himself into believing, I think I can fix him, and then was stabbed in the back by Weirdmake. Et tu, Brute?
I love that little quote. Then we move on to the clash with Magnus, pre-Prospero, where Lorgar intervenes between Magnus and Russ.
So
So
they get in a scuffle.
yes. So at this point, they have killed all the Elder Titans on Agoru. They basically bring the world into compliance, and they have other places to move on to. Russ and Magnus, like brothers, come to blows. As the crusade marches on, the more strange creatures and warp denizens the Imperial forces run across. Magnus, being a psyker, is able to deal with some of these foes with relative ease. He's like, oh yeah, I love magic people. We can just vaporize them super easily. Whereas where his more skeptical brothers, Russ and specifically Mortarion, would have preferred to overwhelm them with physical might. The more abnormal creatures the Imperium came across, the more Russ and Mortarion saw these similarities in Magnus and actually increased their distrust of their Crimson brother.
Indeed. Even though the Sons of Magnus became the actual goats during these conflicts, an interesting side note, the fact that certain portions of the Crusade dealt with the warp all the time and in others it just didn't show up just shows how large the Warhammer universe is. When the Luna Wolves encountered demons for the first time, like in the first, I want to say it's Horus Rising, it was very shortly after that Horus fell to chaos. I mean, Horus knew about the truth of the warp the whole time, but Horus's sons, like Loken, didn't. But the Primarchs did. This didn't help the level of mistrust in the legions. I don't think the Ultramarines encountered too much chaos at all during the Great Crusade, now that I think about it. But fate would have it that the Thousand Sons would be brought in to deal with demons left and right. And this is during the time of the Imperial Truth, when they're like, oh, there's no such things as angels and demons. Meanwhile, Magnus's sons are like, that sure looks like a demon.
If it looks like a demon, smells like a demon, tastes like a demon, it's a demon. So keep in mind that the Thousand Sons and some of the other legions had a fundamentally different opinion on their doctrine of war, which eventually resulted in violence between Magnus and Russ on Arc Reach Secundus, where they begin to fight over the library there. One thing that usually accompanies diving into the warp is the thirst for knowledge, because they understand that the world and universe is so much bigger than their own that they are looking for answers elsewhere. And the wolves are like, this seems a little spooky. Why don't we just burn everything down? So Magnus wants to keep the information. Russ wants to destroy everything. They basically begin to fight over the library there. Lorgar has to step in to resolve the conflict. This conflict of kin would be one of the seeds that lead to the Council of Nicaea. Again, they've basically started throwing hands at this point, so relations are not going well. Somebody probably could have died here, or at least they would have been some collateral damage if Lorgar had not stepped in. I mean, in this case, Lorgar really seems like a good guy. Whatever happened to him?
Yeah. We could probably do an entire story about Lorgar. I wouldn't say Lorgar is the most tragic Primarch, but he definitely gets shafted, because for all intents and purposes, we've said this on the show before, the Emperor is a god. Lorgar was like, yeah, he's a god, and then the Emperor is like, no, you're stupid, and just gaslights him, humiliates him in front of everyone, and then it's like, how could you even believe that I was a god? As he
divinely smacks him down.
Yeah, like shows like clear divine power, is like creating life, doesn't die, he's immortal. Whatever.
Yeah, it's
whatever.
So
the Emperor is not a good guy. He's bad guy.
Another big turning point in the the Great Crusade before the Horus Heresy was also the triumph of Ulanor. Before we get into that, I just want to point out some of the things that are being thrown around in chat, so that if you're listening to this on our podcast, you can kind of know what's going on. So Cuddly Axolotl asks, did all the Ultramarines just try to use the evil magic while telling everyone else to not use magic? Calmberg responds, the Blueberry's first real experience with chaos entities was on Calth, where the word bearers basically try to burn out their sun and corrupt their entire world with dark magic. So that was super cool.
Yes,
But
this
what
was
you're
when. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
what you're specifically referencing is hypocrisy using the warp, which happened in almost all of the legions. The Ultramarines were pretty good at basically silencing their librarians when the Council of Nicaea came out, but a lot of legions were like, "Oh yeah, we won't use psychers anymore," and they're like, "Guys, use the psychers in the background." Like the Space Wolves used the psychers all the time. They were like, "Oh, we're rune priests. We get our magic from the frostborn world of Fenris. It's not from the warp. It's different. We can use it as much as we want." And they're like, "No, that's definitely still using magic."
For
And
sure.
yeah, so some
For
of
the
them were very hypocritical in this way.
Yeah, for the most part, the Ultramarines themselves were very compliant to the Order of Nicaea, saying that like they they're goody two shoes. They were basically the teacher's pets of all of the legions. If the Emperor said something, they basically were like, "Cool, how high?" They're like,
Yeah.
"Actually, we need you to throw your sorcerers into the sun," and they're like, "Awesome, how hard?"
Calmbrew points out another good example of this as well. The White Scars had Storm Seers. They're not wizards, they're Storm Seers. And you're
Yeah.
like, guys, you're just using synonyms at this point. So everything turned out super well. Now, coming back to the triumph of Ulanor, Magnus was present at the ceremony. Now, remember, this was a pivotal point where the Emperor passes off the reins. He basically says, I am going to go work on the Webway project. Well, he didn't say that out loud. We know he's going to work on the Webway project.
He didn't tell nobody.
He didn't tell anybody, which, again, classic blunder. We've said that probably 1,000 times on this podcast. This is basically an imperial dick measuring event because they level an entire continent. They put like every army on parade that they could muster in like the entire sector. There's like almost every legion has representatives. There's only like 3 or 4 legions that are not actually represented there. There's like millions of Astra Militarum troops. There's Titans walking around. And that's a big deal to like march your Titans for glory and fanfare is just
It's a huge flex.
it is a huge flex, right? That would be like us rolling out. Actually, I'm trying to think. We don't really have any. We don't even have anything of the same scale that would even compare to that. That would be like lining up all the United States like aircraft carriers all in one single file line and drove them around the East Coast and was like, "Hey guys, look at all of our aircraft carriers. We can keep them all in one place because we're so cool." Like, then that still doesn't even compare because a Titan would wipe out multiple aircraft carriers with one hand tied behind its back. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's not what we're here to talk about today.
So the triumph of Ulanor, this was almost certainly the last time that Magnus was in the company of his brothers before they essentially stuck a knife in his back. Those in attendance included Magnus, of course, Sanguinius, Mortarion, Angron, Jagatai, Rogol, Fulgrim, Lorgar, and Horus. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the 18 Primarchs were there. At
And
least.
keep
that I
in
could
mind,
find.
like when the soldier, how they're described in the books is even the Astartes, when they see their own Primarchs, they fangirl over their own Primarchs.
Yeah.
So imagine having that many in the same place, and you've got like superhumans just sitting back, like fanning themselves because they're like, "Are you sweating? I'm sweating, man." Words cannot describe how spectacularly erect I am right now. That's
Gosh.
essentially what all of them are saying. So
Uh,
sorry, had to get that out there.
okay, back on topic. Would things really have been better off if Magnus had been declared War Master? Well, no. Magnus, while being the most powerful Primarch, fight me, was probably one of the least experienced commanders since he spent so much time in his personal study contemplating the mysteries of the universe. And a universe full of war, an intellectual is seen as superfluous.
Almost got it on the first try.
Frick! Dang it!
All right, this is basically where we get into the Council of Nicaea. So things are not going how the Thousand Sons of Magnus would like them to go. And we got to basically the trial of Magnus. Think Salem witch trials, but instead of men calling women hysterical witches, it's men calling each other witches and then having a dick measuring contest, essentially. A magical dick measuring
A
contest.
magical dick. Hashtag magical dick. So the space wolves were like, Magnus is a witch. And the Emperor was like, good point, Magnus. Rebuttal? LOL, JK, shut up, you're banned.
Cuddly Axolotl has a good synonym as well. U.S. politics. Yes, yes,
US
absolutely.
politics.
Just minus the magic.
Yeah, this is magic schlonging. A term that an actual US politician used.
Anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because this is how many drinks does it take to turn a Warhammer podcast into a political podcast? At this point, 0. So here we go. So just keep in mind here, guys, that the Emperor had warned Magnus about his use of psychic powers and had to curb his insatiable search for knowledge.
I lost my place. I can't imagine why the Emperor, the one who is also trying to hide the secret about the warp, wouldn't want Magnus to learn so much about the warp.
So remember, guys, tensions had basically already boiled over at the Arc Reach sector.
Wow, you almost got it in the first try.
And the Emperor now had to step in a sweeping verdict, which if you actually read through the transcripts, this killed me when I was reading through this for the first time, because you're like, these guys have some pretty solid arguments. In a sweeping verdict, the Emperor forbade the use of the Librarius and essentially chastised Magnus personally and his legion for their behavior and conduct. The Thousand Sons at this point basically pulled a Homer Simpson and just backed off into the bushes, and they just exited the Great Crusade. They were like, we out.
Yeah, they're like, okay, I'm taking my ball and going home. I sort of made a joke about Magnus not really being able to get a chance to speak, but he actually makes a really strong argument for the Librarius, and still the Emperor was like, shut the fuck up. Why the Emperor even went through the pageantry of the Council of Nicaea is a mystery to me, considering he had his mind set on the outcome from the very beginning. He basically was just like, we're just going to do this to just say that we did it. It was a sham trial meant to keep the legions from splitting, even though that is exactly what it would do, is split the legions. The Emperor, for all his knowledge, gifts, and power, lacked foresight and humility. Being evil will do that to you, though.
At this point, I didn't even blame Magnus for wanting to pull out of the crusade. This was a moment where he realized where he had been pushed out of the inner circle of the Imperium. However, it's very ironic that Morty, who testified against Magnus, would later become overtaken with the power of the warp, and Magnus basically has to teach him how to use his powers. Insert signature look of superiority here.
Yeah, one of the Primarchs who hates the Librarius more than anything, he's just like, I'm racist against witches, then becomes a witch. It's like, oh, come on, dude. It's so ironic. It gave me iron poisoning. So then we move on to past the Order of Nicaea. Magnus ignores the outcome of the trial of Magnus. Duh. Because he's like,
why wouldn't he?
Yeah, it's like, he's like, I know better than you. Having now moved back to Prospero, Magnus has no intention to stop delving to the warp, because he is in fact the son of the biggest megalomaniac in the universe. He has grown used to power, and just because he was publicly admonished to not use his magic, of course he still would. This was his purpose in the crusade. You don't make a wizard in D&D and then spec him into a ranger. Like, that doesn't make any sense. The dude was already lost in the sauce. His whole life has been towards the pursuit of knowledge. He has such a grand repository of warp secrets that he's able to write his own grimoire, the Book of Magnus, to keep them all in. And nothing ever goes wrong when a mighty wizard keeps secret in a big ass book of spells. Just saying. But Magnus continues to delve into the warp and is even given a vision of Horus, or is even given a vision of the Horus heresy and Horus turn into chaos. And at this point, he decides, I must intervene.
And this is where his astral projection goes awry.
Our Twitch chat in Combrew says he knew better. But I'm very smart.
I'm the smartest. And then he realizes he's not. With a cabal With a cabal of the most powerful wizards around him, Magnus decides to astral yeet himself all the way to Terra. Not only does this kill a lot of his strongest sorcerers, pour one out for the real ones, but this also breaks down the psychic defenses at the Imperial Palace, opening up a portal to hell from the warp. This webway path that leads directly to Terra was breached, and the creatures of the warp spilled inside. This was a huge blunder, and he realizes how much of a blunder this is because he doesn't even defend himself here. He enters the throne room and is basically like, this is not a good look for me. He committed basically the equivalent of breaking the ship in the bottle your dad was painstakingly making for hundreds of hours
Yep.
because you and your siblings were playing catch inside or some other sitcom trope, right? This actually sparked an entire war, the war in the webway, that cost a lot of Imperial soldiers and custodes their lives. And custodes take a long time to create. They are not cheap. And a ton of them die in the webway because the Emperor's like, cool, now my palace is being flooded with demons. I have to go deal with that now, and I can't use the webway. The whole reason we did this in the first place. So Magnus screwed it all up. Way to go, dude.
I'm just going to throw this out there. A Warhammer horror movie about the war in the webway would be super cool. Like the Imperial Palace being haunted and Henry Cavill plays a Custodes and would have to like go around and fight. It'd be really
dude,
cool.
Take it from the perspective of like a squad of guardsmen.
Oh no.
Because you know every single one of them is going to die.
Well, guess I'll die. Okay, so at this point, Magnus totally screwed up. And he, for a lack of a better terms, he just mopes. Now that Magnus royally screwed Terra, even before the siege of Terra, he goes into solitude because the Emperor looked at him and slapped him with the biggest, "I'm not mad, I'm disappointed," and then banished his ghost form back to Prospero. The Crimson King knows he messed up and is swallowed by self-pity and regret that he does nothing to stop the war in the webway, and later doesn't do anything to stop his own sanction from the Space Wolves and Russ. He sees them coming and basically opens the doors wide open. Not joking, Magnus actively screwed with the defenses of Prospero because he felt like he deserved his punishment. He orders his fleets away from the planet so that the wolves could approach the planet unmolested and blast it to pieces. He also surrounded Prospero with a psychic fog of war that totally shut down the ability of the members of the Thousand Sons to look into the future, to look into deep space, to look into the warp, surrounding the planet, and blinded them to the approach of the wolves, the Custodes, and the Sisters of Silence. Side note, the Sisters of Silence are so flippin' cool.
Yeah, they are.
Oof.
Now we get into the basically rematch duel with Lehman Russ. The brothers are at it again. Russ, with the help of the super cool Sisters of Silence, is able to break the back of Magnus. This actually ends up shattering his spirit and crippling the Great Cyclops.
So, side note, visiting with our family, I'm surprised how much our relatives were like, yeah, you guys used to beat the crap out of each other. And I just thought, oh yeah, brothers fighting. It's like, apparently we used to do that all the time.
You're like, yeah, that's normal. I used to get a lot of bloody noses. Anyway.
Joke's on you. I've had too many concussions and can't remember a lot of my youth.
Now, something you may not know is that all of the Primarchs have at least some latent psychic abilities. Magnus has this cool ability to increase his physical size so that he swells to the size of a building. But when Russ is somehow able to match his size, what? Like, that's strange. The more and more they fight, Russ wears down Magnus, and they appear to shrink back to their normal, albeit still massive proportions, for something distantly related to an unaugmented Homo sapien.
Reading this battle through, which is also in the book A Thousand Sons, I thought so many times, there's no way Russ walks out of this alive. Even during the conflict, Magnus shatters the breastplate armor of Russ's armor, and those shards actually stab like into his chest and into his heart, and then stabs him through the heart with a psychic spear. Then, somehow, Russ was not killed. Astartes are known for having a backup heart, so it's not surprising that Russ would have a backup. or two. I'm not sure. Primarch physiology is not the same as Astartes' anatomy, but with whatever hearts he still didn't have pumping, he was able to kick Magnus's ass. Even with a critical injury, Russ managed to shatter Magnus's arm, but it still appeared that Russ would lose, right? Like, who's going to win in a fight? Someone with a psychic spear through one of their hearts or a guy with a broken arm?
Seems pretty clear.
He got stabbed through his heart. Fighting on through this horrific injury, Russ manages to actually slice into the remaining eye of Magnus, and from there, the battle completely turns. Magnus was blinded, and the Wolf King took the opportunity to lift Magnus over his knee and shatter his spine. And it is this moment the sorcerers of the Thousand Suns were just straight defeated. From there, Magnus escapes to the warp. In the last moments of his life, Magnus manages to utter a spell that basically absconded him into the warp before the Wolf King could take his head. Literally mid-swing, he just disappears. Sort of how, like, Magnus got baned is what Comber says in the chat. 100% that is what happened.
We'll see what will break first, your mind or your body.
And apparently it was his body at this point. It was his body that broke first.
Oh, my body's still broken.
Broken, battered, and bruised, Magnus is not doing so great. He resides on the planet of the sorcerers while his legion looks for pieces of him to remake him. Horcruxes? Warhammer did it first. Anyway, Ahriman
I was thinking the same thing.
Ahriman and other sorcerers are successful in finding a great number of these shards and piecing him back together. Magnus at this point is recognizable and not fading away into nothing. Interestingly enough, Russ breaking Magnus's back was the catalyst to bringing back Vulcan, a different Primarch. One of Magnus's shards end up in a salamander's ship as a mental projection and speaks with Artellus Numion, eventually convincing Numion to sacrifice himself to resurrect the salamander's Primarch, Vulcan, who is a perpetual.
Yeah, you guys are all tracking that, right?
Yeah, that's not confusing.
Totally introduced a bunch of new characters that you guys have no idea who they are, and they're somehow getting resurrected because another spirit form of Magnus, who appeared on a ship for no random reason, and then talked to a guy and said, hey, you should probably kill yourself. And he says, okay, jumps into a volcano, and then another Primarch came back. That's actually what happened.
Straight up what happens.
Warhammer is wild. Guys, at this point, Magnus is mostly rebuilt. I know. Anyone who just heard that, they're like, is he on drugs? Not at this current moment. But Magnus joins Horus. So, Andrew, tell us a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh. It is at this point that the K-Sons and Magnus join with Horus. His legion, those few that remain, have now a grudge to fill against the Wolves and the Empyrean, which leads us to the Fury of Magnus.
All right. Time out for a minute. So, the Fury of Magnus is one of the Siege of Terra books. The Siege of Terra is the series that immediately follows the Horus Heresy. They're all following the same story, but it's technically two different series. So, the Horus Heresy is like over 60 books at this point. Between that and the Siege of Terra, it's like closer to 70. Not all of them happen in chronological order. Even though the first 5 or 6 books, are written in chronological order. Like, they happen back to back. Seems pretty rational, right? That's how a long series should be written, is back to back, but no. So literally the opening description of the book, Fury of Magnus, reads this. This is a direct quote from their wiki page. Fury of Magnus is the second novella of the Horus Heresy, the Siege of Terra series, taking place between book 4 and book 5. So the second book talks about the events between 4 and 5. Why not just put it between 4 and 5? Drives me nuts.
That's a great question. I don't know.
That is some annoying bullshit right there. So that is my gripe about the Horus Heresy. Anyways, I'll go through a quick summary of what happens. So, traitors attack Terra, but Magnus keeps his forces out of the main assault. He says, oh no, we're just a bunch of support wizards. You guys go do your thing. We've already casted all of our fireballs. It's time to cast shield instead.
I need to
Anyways,
take a long rest.
yeah, they're doing stuff. So during this time, I mentioned this earlier, Magnus is actually teaching Mortarion to control his powers because Mortarion has basically become a psyker at this point because he's given himself over to the Chaos God Nurgle, which is the green one. If you guys don't
The
know,
green one. Magnus
Papa
follows the
Nurgle,
blue
as he
one.
knows. Yes, Magnus follows the blue one. Mortarion follows the green one. So it's the chaos god of disease essentially. So he's got all these new powers. He's freaking out because he doesn't know how to use them. So Magnus is like, "Hey, why don't I teach you how to do this?" So Magnus also has a grudge against Mortarion. So he basically teaches Mortarion how to control his powers so Mortarion can be in a more effective distraction. So Magnus can actually enter the palace. He psychically disguises himself as blood angels also. So super fun. They're like, we like red. We'll stick with that color. Eventually, Magnus and a few of his sons are able to get into the palace, but are stopped by Malkador, who, always doing the Emperor's will, is trying to convert Magnus back to their side. Now, funny thing is, they're actually playing a game of regicide while they do this, which is basically wizard's chess. It's not wizard. That's not a apt description. It's future chess. That's all they're
It's
playing.
chess in 40K.
Yes. So Magnus ends up almost killing Malkador during this because he's like, "Hey, I'm actually done with your whole TED talk and why I need to come back to the Emperor," and almost kills him. So that's super fun. Magnus then enters the throne room after being led there by a projection of the Emperor himself. This projection named himself for some reason because the Emperor's kind of full of himself. So this projection of the Emperor is called Revelation. Magnus
A little on the
destroys.
nose.
It's a
Okay.
little bit on the nose, right? So Magnus destroys this projection and actually goes to slay his father, only to be blocked by Vulcan at the last moment. See how everything is coming together? The Primarch that he accidentally resurrects because he died, but then talks to Numian, then comes in and stops Magnus from taking his revenge against the Emperor for abandoning him and trying to make him into a red cell battery. Yeah, it's all coming together. The eyes of the Emperor opened at this point, and he's sitting on the golden throne, so he's not trying to defend himself. His eyes open, and suddenly Emperor and Magnus are flying through the warp together. The Emperor basically has his final talk with Magnus and says, "This is the future that you could have." And he's showing him the Imperium is not at war. The Civil War is over. They've conquered everything. The future had Magnus upon the golden throne, forever navigating the waves of the warp in pure bliss, eternally searching for knowledge with the Emperor. The Emperor asks Magnus to join him. Join in the Great Scouring. He basically says, "Hey, I need you to join me. However, I need you to help me kill your brothers because they're traitors. We need to remove the taint of chaos. We're going to embrace this new future. We're going to get a brand new subway system. But I do need you to kill your own sons in the process. They're a little too tainted at this point to ever come back." And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And Magnus says, "No, I can't do that. I'm not going to abandon my sons." And at that point, he falls completely to chaos.
He literally waits until the very end to finally succumb because Magnus really is not a terrible guy. And, like, for example, Angron is like, I would love to kill the Emperor because I'm an angry gorilla who needs to just kill things all the time. Mortarion wants to kill the Emperor because he's like, oh, well, he robbed me the chance to kill my father on my homeworld, so I'll settle with just killing you. And then, I mean, others like Lorgar's like, hey, I've been betrayed by the Emperor. I think the Emperor is a false god instead of a real god. I'm now trying to dethrone him for the real gods of chaos. Magnus was like, I feel like I still have a purpose. And then the Emperor is like, yeah, you're not gonna like this. This is your purpose. And he was like, you've gotta be kidding me, dude. He's like, I was like, the Emperor, if he hadn't been a complete dick, probably could have turned Magnus.
Mm-hmm.
He probably
100%.
could have been like, hey, dude, like, I have a better purpose than you, like, to lead my Imperium. Instead, he's like, nah, dude, I'm going to turn you into a battery. And obviously, Magnus was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm out.
Yeah.
And then he leaves.
Guys, we have talked a lot about Magnus today. That is all we are actually going to talk about with Magnus today. We're just going to go over a little bit of nerddom news. We've got a couple of things in here. Andrew, I know you wrote down some notes, so please tell us, give us some of the news, please.
In Star Wars news, we now have a trailer for Skeleton Crew. This is going to be a crew of non-Force users, I believe. Jude Law is in it, so I'm already interested. What I have heard so far that it is going to be a children's show, so maybe set your expectations where they need to be.
That is a good disclaimer to make, because that does change my expectations for that quite a bit.
Cuddly Axolotl says it looks like the Star Wars Goonies. He's 100% right. That is what it looks like. In other Star Wars news, Star Wars Outlaws actually has an update which patched a lot of bug fixes and some performance issues that the game was having, so that's really cool. I personally was having some performance issues. I do not have a weak computer, but there were still some weird things going on with Star Wars Outlaws, so I'm happy that this is getting fixed. In the news of the untitled Rey movie, one of the writers seems to have left the show. We're not sure if that's because they were finished like writing the script and they're like, okay, I have to move on to a different project, or they were fired, or if there was creative differences. We don't really know, so we're going to keep an eye on that and give you guys news as we hear it.
We also know in more Warhammer news that Emperor's Children are getting a codex in 2025. Fulgrim seems to be coming. That seems to be obvious. There's still a lot of speculation as to what kinds of units we will get with the codex when it comes out. Other codexes set to release in 2025, Astra Militarum, Imperial Knights, and Aldari, the Eldar. So very interesting. I think, this is my prediction, Eldar are going to get nerfed hard in their new codex, because they're winning all the time and have been winning for like the last 2 years plus straight. So just keep in mind here, guys, when you guys are looking at codexes and new releases and stuff, just download them from Warhammer Community. Guys, they give you the PDFs for most of these things. So when they release them, download them right away. PDFs are small, they're free, but a lot of times you don't need to buy the codex. And remember, Wahapedia has that information for free as well. Just saying. There goes all of our potential sponsorship by Games Workshop, so that's fine. But I don't think any Warhammer creators get sponsored
talk
by
about
Games
blood
Workshop.
money.
Yeah, so. And that, folks, is the end of our episode. I'll go through our outro really quick. Andrew, do we want to read this out as we finish out?
Yes, I think we should.
Perfect. Go ahead and find somebody to rate it out. I will go through our outro. Guys, thank you everyone to our, especially big thanks to our patrons. Huge shout out to Cuddly Axolotl, who's in the chat. Thank you so much for hanging out. Also, Calmbrew as well, and our Strike Master Ice, and I can't remember the other one because I have their real names up here. So thank you guys all. Management Slug, thank you for all supporting us. So you guys are the reason we do this. Super happy to have all you guys on our Discord server. Again, we're talking a lot about Warhammer in our next episode that's coming out next week that we already recorded. We're talking about how to get into Warhammer for the first time. It's like a 35-minute episode, super short and concise. Thank you, Calmbrew, for a lot of the notes on that as well. You gave us a lot of super clear and concise stuff, and that's all on there as well. Make sure that if you guys do find any value in this, that you guys choose to support us for $5 a month over at Talk About Tatooine on our Patreon. You can find that on all of our links. If you can't do that, support us by subscribing on YouTube, watch our videos, like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube things. It really does help. It pushes us up into those brackets. It spreads the word around a little bit. And seriously, guys, if we can make money from views and subscriptions, we can do a lot of cool things. So please support us over there. Sure. Thank you guys all for watching. Shoot us an email if you guys have any questions at talkabouttatooine@gmail.com. If you want any of your questions featured on there, we're happy to do that as long as they're not too not safe for work. And we're going to have a good time. Guys, until next time, the Emperor protects. Andrew, who are we going to raid?
We're raiding out to Mr. Hellpod, who is playing Helldivers 2.
Sick. Guys, thank you so much for hanging around. Make a little bit of noise when you guys get over into that raid. And we'll see you guys in the next one.